In the gilded cage of New York's elite, one name was whispered with more fear than reverence: Jeremy Whittaker. His fortune was a modern empire, but his temper was a medieval weapon, capable of dismantling careers and crushing spirits in a single brutal tirade. From Wall Street titans to his own board of directors, everyone learned to walk on eggshells around him. They bowed, they scraped, they endured. But they never fought back. Until one Tuesday night in the city's most exclusive restaurant, a 24-year-old waitress named Natalia Orlova, with worn-out shoes and a spirit worn even thinner, decided the billionaire had finally met someone who refused to break. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of the day the storm met the mountain. Ethelgard wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater. Every night a performance of wealth and power unfolded under its vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. The air itself seemed expensive, thick with the scent of truffle oil, aged leather, and unspoken agreements. For the staff it was a different kind of performance, one of flawless servitude, of anticipating needs before they were voiced, of becoming invisible. And tonight the lead actor in this grand drama was Jeremy Whittaker. His arrival sent a familiar shockwave of anxiety through the restaurant. Mr. Dubois, the usually unflappable maitre d', developed a nervous tic in his left eye. Waiters straightened their already immaculate uniforms. Even the low hum of conversation from other tables seemed to dip in deference. Jeremy Whittaker didn't just occupy a table, he conquered it. He sat alone in his usual corner booth, a shark in a tailored Brioni suit, his presence casting a long shadow over the entire floor. He wasn't loud or boisterous. The danger in Jeremy was in his stillness, his predatory focus. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing and forgave less. Natalia Orlova was 3 hours into a 10-hour shift. Her feet ached with a deep, familiar throb, a constant reminder of the 16 blocks she walked from the subway and the miles she paced across the marble floor each night. Her mind, however, was miles away, in a sterile beige room at Mount Sinai, where her younger brother Nico was fighting a battle far bigger than hers. The bills for his experimental treatment were a mountain, and her job at Ethelgard was the only shovel she had to chip away at it. Every polite smile, every refilled water glass, every cleared plate was a small piece of ammunition in her private war. So when Mr. Dubois approached her, his face pale and his smile stretched thin, she knew her night was about to get worse. "Natalia," he whispered, his voice tight. "Mr. Whittaker's section. Robert called in sick. You're the most senior on the floor. You know the protocol." Natalia's heart sank. The Whittaker protocol. It was an unwritten rule book for survival. No sudden movements. Speak only when spoken to. Anticipate his order. A New York strip medium rare, seared hard with a side of steamed asparagus, no sauce. A bottle of 2012 Harlan Estate decanted for precisely 30 minutes. Never ask if he's enjoying his meal. Just watch, wait, and disappear. She took a deep, steadying breath, her professional mask sliding firmly into place. "Of course, Mr. Dubois." Her first approach was textbook. She poured the decanted wine with a steady hand, the ruby liquid catching the light. He didn't acknowledge her, his gaze fixed on the tablet propped against the water carafe, displaying stock market tickers in a cascade of red and green. She placed the bread basket, a single warm brioche, roll his preference, on the table. Still nothing. She retreated, her movements fluid and silent. For the next 40 minutes the grim ballet continued. She served his steak, cooked to the exact specifications she'd personally relayed to the chef, with a sense of impending doom. The asparagus was bright green and perfectly aligned. Natalia was clearing the plates of an adjacent table when she heard it. a fork clattering against a plate with sharp, deliberate force. It was a summons. She turned her stomach clenching. Jeremy Whittaker was staring at his steak. He had taken only one bite. He slowly lifted his gaze to meet hers, and the calm she'd seen earlier was gone. A cold fire was burning in his eyes. "Is there a problem, sir?" Natalia asked, her voice even and low. He gestured at the plate with a contemptuous flick of his wrist. "A problem, no. A disaster. I asked for medium rare. This is a travesty. It's an insult to the cow it came from." Natalia looked at the steak. The sliver he had cut showed a perfectly warm red center. It was the very definition of medium rare. Any chef in the world would have confirmed it. "I can assure you, sir, the chef cooked it to— Are you calling me a liar?" He cut in his voice, dropping to a silken, dangerous whisper that was far more terrifying than a shout. The other tables nearby had fallen silent. The performance had a new, unplanned scene. "Or are you perhaps suggesting that my palate, which can discern the subtle notes of a multi-million-dollar acquisition, is incapable of identifying a poorly cooked piece of meat?" Natalia felt a hot flush of anger creep up her neck. It was a familiar feeling, the same helpless rage she felt when doctors gave her vague, expensive non-answers about Nico. But here, in this temple of privilege, it felt different. It felt personal. "No, sir," she said, her training kicking in. "I am merely suggesting that there might be a misunderstanding. I will have the kitchen prepare another one for you immediately." She reached for the plate, but his hand shot out, clamping down on her wrist. It wasn't a violent grip, but it was firm, possessive, and shockingly cold. "Don't touch it. I want you to understand the scope of your failure. You work in one of the finest establishments in this city, and you serve this garbage. Does your mediocrity know no bounds, or do you simply not care?" His words were like acid. He wasn't just talking about the steak anymore. He was talking about her worn shoes, her tired eyes, her life which he assumed was as cheap and disposable as the meal he was dissecting. And in that moment, something inside Natalia Orlova, something that had been bent and bruised but never broken, finally snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a rebellion that started in the soles of her aching feet and shot up her spine like a lightning strike. She looked from his cold, manicured hand on her wrist to his arrogant, handsome face. She thought of Nico hooked up to machines fighting with a quiet dignity this man could never comprehend. She thought of the condescending smiles, the dismissive waves, the casual cruelty she endured every single day to give her brother a fighting chance. And she'd had enough. With a slow, deliberate movement, she pulled her wrist free from his grasp. His eyes widened, slightly surprised by the resistance. Then she did something no one at Ethelgard had ever done. She didn't apologize. She didn't scurry away. She met his furious gaze with a calm, unyielding fire of her own. "My mediocrity," she began, her voice shockingly steady, "involves working 60 hours a week to pay for things you've never had to imagine. My caring is reserved for things that actually matter, not for the bruised ego of a man who mistakes his wealth for wisdom and his temper for strength." A collective gasp, sharp and audible, rippled through the nearby tables. Mr. Dubois looked as if he might faint. Jeremy's face, which had been a mask of cold fury, now registered something new, utter disbelief. He leaned back, a flicker of something almost like curiosity in his eyes. "What did you just say to me?" Natalia picked up the water carafe. "I said," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "that you are a bully. You come in here and you terrorize the staff, not because the steak is wrong, but because some part of your life is so profoundly broken that your only recourse is to try and break everyone else around you. It must be a terribly lonely existence." She then tilted the carafe and poured the ice-cold water directly onto the offending steak, the splash hitting the plate with a sizzling sound that echoed the shock in the room. The water pooled around the meat, drowning the asparagus. "There," she said, placing the empty carafe down with a soft click. "Now it's ruined. My apologies." She straightened her apron, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve like steel. She looked Jeremy Whittaker directly in the eye, a waitress earning $20 an hour looking at a man worth $20 billion. "And I quit." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving behind a drowned steak, a stunned billionaire, and the deafening silence of a performance that had been irrevocably, spectacularly shattered. As she pushed through the kitchen doors, the cacophony of pots and pans a welcome relief, she didn't feel fear or regret. For the first time in a very long time, she felt free. She had no idea that her act of defiance hadn't ended her story with Jeremy Whittaker. It had just written the first chapter. The freedom Natalia felt lasted for approximately 12 hours. It carried her through the stunned gauntlet of her former colleagues, past the ashen-faced Mr. Dubois, who could only mouth, "I'm sorry," and out into the cool night air. It even fueled her defiant march to the subway, a victorious soldier retreating from a battle she'd unexpectedly won. But freedom, she quickly learned, didn't pay the rent, and it certainly didn't pay for Nico's next round of treatment, the invoice for which was sitting on her small kitchen table like a ticking time bomb. By the next morning, the reality of her situation had settled in like a cold, damp fog. She was jobless, blacklisted most likely. The world of fine dining in New York was small and incestuous. The story of the waitress who drowned Jeremy Whittaker's steak would travel faster than gossip on a trading floor. Who would hire her now? She spent the day making a list of potential jobs, cafes, diners, bars far from the glittering heart of Manhattan. Places where the tips were smaller and the hours longer. She sent out a dozen applications, her heart growing heavier with each click of the submit button. By late afternoon, despair was beginning to set in. She was sitting at her window watching the city rush by without her when the buzzer for her apartment shrieked. She wasn't expecting anyone. Assuming it was a package for a neighbor, she pressed the talk button. "Hello." A smooth baritone voice answered, impossibly crisp through the cheap speaker. "Ms. Natalia Orlova. My name is Gideon Beck. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Jeremy Whittaker." Natalia's blood ran cold. He'd sent someone. To what threatened her serve her with a lawsuit for defamation and steak drowning. Her defiance from the night before curdled into pure fear. I have nothing to say to Mr. Whittaker," she stammered. "He's not asking you to speak, Miss Orlova. He's asking for a moment of your time. I assure you it will be to your benefit. May I come up?" Against her better judgment, a sliver of morbid curiosity won out. What could the man who had everything possibly want from the woman who had just thrown it all away? She buzzed him in. The man who appeared at her door a minute later was the polar opposite of Jeremy Whittaker. Where Whittaker was a storm of dark energy, Gideon Beck was an oasis of calm. He was in his late 40s with kind eyes, a neatly trimmed silver-grey beard, and a suit that was just as expensive as his boss's, but worn with an air of quiet competence rather than aggressive dominance. He held a sleek leather portfolio. "Ms. Orlova," he said, with a small professional smile. "Thank you for seeing me." "I'm not sure I had a choice," she replied, her arms crossed defensively. Her small apartment, usually her sanctuary, felt cramped and exposed with this emissary from another world standing in it. "You always have a choice," Gideon said, his gaze taking in her modest surroundings without a hint of judgment. "Which is, in fact, why I'm here." Mr. Whittaker was impressed. Natalia blinked. Impressed I publicly humiliated him and quit my job. What's there to be impressed by? Your honesty, Gideon stated simply, and your nerve. Mr. Whittaker is surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear. Sycophants, yes-men, corporate cowards. He pays them millions to agree with him. Last night you told him the truth for free. He finds that novel. He opened the portfolio. He is prepared to offer you a position. Natalia stared at him, certain this was some kind of elaborate, cruel joke. A position. Doing what taste-testing his food to make sure it's sufficiently abused. A faint smile touched Gideon's lips. Personal assistant to the CEO of Whittaker Capital. The words hung in the air so absurd that Natalia almost laughed. You're not serious. I'm a waitress. I have no experience. Your experience, Ms. Orlova, is precisely why he wants you. You don't flinch. You don't cower. You see a problem in this case, a man behaving like a tyrant, and you address it directly. He believes that skill set might be transferable to a corporate environment. Gideon slid a single sheet of paper from the portfolio and placed it on her cluttered coffee table. It was a formal job offer. Natalia looked at the number at the bottom of the page, and her breath hitched. The annual salary was more than she could hope to make in 5 years of waiting tables. It was more than enough to cover all of Nico's treatments with plenty left over. It was a lifeline. A golden, diamond-encrusted lifeline thrown by the very man she'd tried to drown. The twist was so sharp it gave her vertigo. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would he do this to keep me close, to make my life a living hell as revenge? Gideon's expression became serious. I have worked for Jeremy Whittaker for 15 years. He is a difficult, demanding, and often infuriating man. He is a force of nature, and sometimes he's a natural disaster. But he is not petty. Revenge is inefficient. This is not about revenge, Miss Orlova. This is about value. He believes you have it. He wants to see if he's right. He gestured to the contract. The offer is real. It includes full top-tier medical benefits for you and your immediate family effective immediately. I took the liberty of looking into your personal circumstances. Your brother Nico. The mention of her brother's name was a punch to the gut. They knew. Of course they knew. A man like Whittaker could find out anything. The offer wasn't just a job. It was a targeted solution to her most desperate problem. It felt less like an opportunity and more like a beautifully crafted trap. She sank onto her worn sofa, her mind racing. Work for him, the man who embodied everything she despised, the architect of her public firing. It was a deal with the devil, but the devil was offering to pay for a miracle. What are the terms? She asked, her voice hollow. The terms are simple, Gideon said. You work directly for him. You manage his schedule, his correspondence, his daily needs. You will be his gatekeeper. You will be expected to be honest, efficient, and unflappable. Your sole duty is to the office of the CEO. You answer to him, and only to him. And if I say no? If you say no, Gideon said, his voice softening slightly, then I will thank you for your time and leave. Mr. Whittaker will never bother you again. As I said, you have a choice. Natalia looked at the contract, the salary, the medical benefits. She pictured Nico's pale face, the hope in his eyes that she tried so hard to keep alive. Could she swallow her pride? Could she walk into the lion's den every day if it meant saving her brother? Her pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Nico's life was not. She picked up a pen from the coffee table, her hand surprisingly steady. Where do I sign? Gideon Beck gave her that small, knowing smile again. Welcome to Whittaker Capital, Miss Orlova. Your desk will be ready tomorrow morning at 8. As he left, Natalia was left alone with the contract and the sickening, exhilarating feeling that she hadn't just accepted a job. She had accepted a challenge. She was walking back into the storm, not as a victim, but as someone who now had a seat at the table. She just hoped she wouldn't get eaten alive. The headquarters of Whittaker Capital occupied the top 10 floors of a skyscraper that pierced the Manhattan skyline like a shard of obsidian. The lobby was a cavern of Italian marble and brushed steel so quiet you could hear the silent swipe of security badges. It was designed to intimidate, to communicate in no uncertain terms that this was a place where fortunes were made and lost on a whim. Natalia, dressed in the most professional and only black suit she owned, hastily purchased that morning, felt like a sparrow in an eagle's nest. The contract in her bag felt less like a lifeline and more like a leash. Gideon Beck met her in the lobby and escorted her to a private elevator that shot them upwards with stomach-lurching speed. "The top floor is Mr. Whittaker's executive suite," he explained as the floor numbers blurred past. "Your desk is just outside his office. You are the last line of defense. No one sees him. No one speaks to him without going through you first." The elevator doors opened onto a space of breathtaking minimalist austerity. The floors were polished concrete. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the city below. It felt less like an office and more like a villain's lair from a spy movie. A handful of people moved through the space with the hushed, frantic energy of surgeons in an operating theater. Her desk was a large, formidable piece of dark wood positioned directly in front of 2 colossal steel doors, her new battlefield. "He's in a meeting," Gideon said, pointing to a do not disturb light glowing red beside the doors. "Your first task is to familiarize yourself with his schedule. It's fluid." He tapped the sleek monitor on her desk, bringing up a calendar that looked like a color-coded anxiety attack. Every 15-minute block was filled. Conference calls with Tokyo acquisition analyses, legal briefings. For the first few hours, Natalia existed in a state of controlled panic. Phones rang with callers who sounded impatient and important. Emails flooded her inbox, all marked urgent. She handled it all with the grim efficiency she'd learned from juggling a dozen tables during a Saturday night rush. She deflected, she postponed, she promised to pass on messages, all while her heart hammered against her ribs. At precisely 11:00 a.m., the red light beside the steel doors blinked off. A moment later, one of the doors swung open, and Jeremy Whittaker strode out. He looked different here in his natural habitat. The suit seemed less like a costume and more like armor. The predatory energy she'd felt in the restaurant was amplified, focused. He didn't even glance at her as he walked past her desk, Gideon falling into step beside him. "The offer from Holloway is an insult," Jeremy was saying, his voice a low growl. "It's a lowball attempt to rattle the shareholders. I want a full counter-offensive. Dig into every corner of Holloway's life, his business, his personal dealings. I want to know what he had for breakfast. Find me a weakness, Gideon." "We're already on it, Jeremy," Gideon replied calmly. Jeremy stopped at the edge of the glass wall, looking down at the city as if he owned it. "Good." He finally turned his head, his stormy eyes landing on Natalia. There was no recognition, no hint of their dramatic encounter. He was looking at her as if she were a new piece of furniture. "You," he said, pointing a finger at her. "Coffee. Black. Now." He turned and walked back into his office, the steel door closing with a soft, definitive whoosh. Natalia sat frozen for a second, the blunt command echoing in the silent office. This was it. The test. Was she a waitress? Or was she his assistant? She took a breath, stood up, and walked not to the high-tech coffee machine in the corner, but to the closed doors of his office. She knocked once, firmly. There was no response. She knocked again. "What?" came the irritated roar from within. She opened the door and stepped inside. His office was even more intimidating than the antechamber. It was vast and Spartan, dominated by a massive desk that was an organized chaos of documents and screens. He was standing by the window again, his back to her. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Natalia Oliver. I am your new personal assistant. My duties as outlined by Mr. Beck include managing your schedule correspondence and administrative needs. They do not include fetching coffee. There is a state-of-the-art machine in the main office that I am happy to show you how to use." Silence. The air in the room crackled with tension. She could feel the stares of the people outside, who had undoubtedly stopped breathing to see what would happen. Jeremy turned around slowly. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. He walked from the window to his desk, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. He circled it, never taking his eyes off her, like a shark sizing up its prey. He finally stopped, leaning back against the front of the desk, crossing his arms. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smile of appraisal, of challenge accepted. "Gideon!" He called out, his voice booming enough to be heard through the open door. "Cancel my 11:30. Ms. Orlova and I need to establish some ground rules." Gideon simply replied, "Yes, sir." Jeremy fixed his gaze back on Natalia. "Close the door." She did the click of the latch, sounding like a cell door locking. She was alone with him. "You have a file on my desk," he said, nodding towards a thin folder. "It contains a list of every task I require from my assistant. The list is non-negotiable. Add fetching coffee to it. As for your other duties, you will learn them. You will be expected to be 10 steps ahead of me at all times. You will anticipate my needs before I have them. You will be invisible when I need quiet and indispensable when I need action. If you waste my time, if you fail, if you annoy me, you will be gone. Is that clear?" "Perfectly," Natalia said, refusing to be intimidated. "Good. Now about last night," he said, the shift in topic so sudden it almost threw her. "You said my life must be profoundly broken. An interesting analysis. You have 1 week to review the preliminary files on the Holloway hostile takeover bid. I want your assessment, not a financial breakdown. I have an army of analysts for that. I want your assessment, the one you gave me at the restaurant. Tell me where my enemy is broken." Natalia was stunned. This wasn't a punishment. It was an assignment. A real one. "I'm not a business analyst," she said. "I'm aware," he retorted. "You're the woman who diagnosed my soul over a piece of beef. I want to see if you can do the same to my rivals. Don't tell me about their stock prices. Tell me about their character flaws. Find their vanity, their greed, their fear. The files will be on your desk. Don't disappoint me." He then pointed toward the door. "Now get out and send Gideon in, and Miss Orlova." She paused at the door, turning back. "The coffee," he said, his eyes glinting. "Still black." Natalia walked out of his office, her mind reeling. She hadn't been fired. She had been armed. He wasn't just testing her. He was using her. He was sharpening her defiance into a tool for his own use. She walked over to the coffee machine, her hands moving with mechanical precision. She wasn't just making coffee. She was accepting the terms of this strange, dangerous new war. As she carried the cup back to his office, placing it on the corner of her desk for him to retrieve himself, she realized the truth of her new position. She was in the belly of the beast, but the beast had just given her a set of teeth. The weeks that followed were a blur of organized chaos. Natalia learned the rhythm of Whittaker Capital, the ebb and flow of its ruthless tide. She learned that Jeremy Whittaker operated on 3 hours of sleep, a diet of coffee and ambition, and a level of intensity that burned out anyone who got too close. His temper was still a weapon, but she saw it differently now. It was a tool he used with surgical precision, dismantling a rival CEO on a conference call with the same cold fury he'd used on her at the restaurant. She, in turn, became ruthlessly efficient. She mastered the schedule, rerouting his entire day around a 5-minute delay in traffic. She learned the names and weaknesses of every major player in his orbit. She was the wall they all ran into before they could get to him, and she was surprisingly good at it. The same protective instinct that drove her to care for Nico now drove her to protect Jeremy's most valuable asset, his time. They rarely spoke of anything personal. Their interactions were a staccato of commands and confirmations. Yet a strange, unspoken respect began to form between them. He never asked her to fetch coffee again. He would emerge from his office, grab the cup she'd left on her desk, and retreat without a word. It was a silent truce. Her real work began after hours when the office emptied out and the city lights glittered outside the glass walls. That was when she tackled the Holloway file. Brendan Holloway was a tech billionaire, a flashy new money rival who wanted to absorb Whittaker Capital and seize its legacy. The financial analysts had prepared binders full of data on market positions and share values. Natalia ignored them. She read personal interviews, watched old keynotes, and scrolled through years of social media posts. She looked for the man, not the mogul. She found vanity in the way he always stood to the right in photos showing his good side. She found insecurity in his constant need to mention his humble beginnings. She found a tell in every high-pressure interview he would compulsively adjust his tie, a small crack in a polished facade. She compiled her notes into a simple 2-page report focusing on psychology, not finances. She titled it The Holloway Vulnerability Assessment and left it on Jeremy's desk. The next morning he called her into his office. The report was in his hand. "This is what you came up with?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "He adjusts his tie. He does it when he's bluffing or cornered," Natalia said calmly. At the Stanford Tech Summit in 2022, he was asked about a rumored production delay. He adjusted his tie and lied. The delay was announced 2 weeks later. In an interview with Forbes, he was asked about his first company's bankruptcy. He adjusted his tie and spun a story about a bad market. Public records show he was forced out by his co-founders. Jeremy was silent, studying her. "You think you can read a man by the way he fiddles with his neckwear?" "I think pressure reveals a person's foundation," she replied. "His is weak." He tossed the report onto his desk. "We have a board meeting tomorrow. Holloway will be there to make his case to my shareholders. You'll be in the room." The board meeting was the real theater of war. Natalia sat in a chair against the wall, a silent observer, as men in $1,000 suits argued over the fate of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Brendan Holloway was charismatic and smooth, his presentation slick and persuasive. He spoke of synergy and future-proofing, charming several board members. Then came the Q&A. Jeremy, who had been silent until now, began his attack. It was masterful. He didn't raise his voice. He asked quiet, pointed questions, each one designed to poke at the very insecurities Natalia had identified. He brought up Holloway's first failed company. Holloway, caught off guard, smiled his slick smile. "A valuable learning experience in a tough market," he began. And then almost imperceptibly his hand went to his tie. He adjusted the knot. Natalia saw it. More importantly, she saw Jeremy see it. A flicker of understanding passed between them across the vast boardroom table. It was all the confirmation Jeremy needed. He knew Holloway was lying, overstating his position. The rest of the attack was brutal. Jeremy dismantled Holloway's proposal, piece by piece, armed with the certainty that his opponent was bluffing. By the end, Holloway was visibly flustered. His charm evaporated, leaving only a sheen of desperate sweat on his brow. The board voted overwhelmingly to reject his offer. As they filed out of the room, Jeremy paused by Natalia's chair. "Not bad, Ms. Orlova," he murmured, so low no one else could hear. Not bad at all. It was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given her. That night, feeling a strange sense of victory, Natalia stayed late to organize Jeremy's files for an upcoming trip. It was then that she stumbled upon it. Tucked away in a mislabeled digital folder, deep in the server archives was a project file named Nightingale. It was old-dated, over a decade ago. Curiosity piqued, she opened it. It wasn't a corporate acquisition. It was a biomedical venture. The proposal outlined a revolutionary new technology for treating a rare, aggressive form of childhood leukemia. The technical documents were dense, but the mission statement was clear, written with a passion and hope that seemed utterly alien to the Jeremy Whittaker she knew. Then she saw the names on the project charter: Jeremy Whittaker and Walter Davies. Walter Davies. The name was vaguely familiar. A quick search revealed he was a former partner, a man who had vanished from the public eye after a bitter falling out with Jeremy years ago. As she dug deeper, a horrifying story began to emerge. Project Nightingale was Jeremy's passion. Walter Davies had been his best friend and the lead scientist. But Davies had betrayed him. He'd sold the proprietary research to a rival pharmaceutical giant, gutting the project for a massive payday before disappearing. The betrayal had not only killed the company, but had also financially ruined the early-stage Whittaker capital. It was the event that had forged the ruthless, untrusting tycoon he was today. But that wasn't the ghost. The ghost was in the appendix. It was a patient case file, attached as the prime motivator for the project. The patient's name was Leo Whittaker. Date of birth, March 12, 1998. Diagnosis, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Relation to project head, younger brother. Natalia felt the air leave her lungs. She stared at the grainy photo of a smiling, red-haired boy. The same photo she'd once glimpsed on Jeremy's desk late one night, a picture he kept face down. Leo, his brother. Project Nightingale wasn't just a business venture. It was a desperate attempt to save his dying brother. And its failure at the hands of his best friend hadn't just cost him his company. It had cost him everything. The cold, unfeeling tyrant of Whittaker Capital. The man who terrorized waiters over a steak. His rage wasn't just a character flaw. It was a monument built over a grave. His fury was a shield, protecting a wound so deep and so profound that he couldn't bear for the world to see it. Natalia switched off her monitor, the sterile silence of the office suddenly feeling heavy with grief. She now understood the man in the corner office. She understood the source of his brokenness. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The next morning, Natalia walked into the office with a new, heavy sense of purpose. The usual office chatter faded into the background. The ringing phones, the urgent emails, they all seemed trivial now. She saw Jeremy not as a boss, but as a man haunted by a ghost she had finally met. She waited until noon, until she knew he was between calls. Taking a deep breath, she walked to his office and knocked. "Enter," he commanded. She stepped inside. He was at his desk, scowling at a spreadsheet. "What is it, Ms. Orlova? I'm busy." "Project Nightingale," she said. The name hit him like a physical blow. His head snapped up the scowl, vanishing, replaced by a look of raw, unguarded shock. The mask was gone. For a split second, she saw the man he must have been a decade ago. "How do you know that name?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I found the files on the server." she said simply. I know about Walter Davies. And I know about Leo. He stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped back against the floor. The fury that flashed in his eyes was hotter and more personal than any she had seen before. You had no right. Those are my private records. You tasked me with finding the weaknesses in your enemies, Natalia said, her voice unshaking despite the storm gathering in front of her. I think it's important to understand your own. Your rage. It's not a tool, Mr. Whitaker. It's a cage, and Walter Davies built it. He stared at her, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists on his desk. He looked like he wanted to throw her out of the building. But he didn't. He just stood there breathing heavily, wrestling with a decade of walled-off pain. Get out, he finally whispered, his voice hoarse. No, she said softly. I'm not one of your sycophants. Remember, you hired me because I don't run. She took a step closer. The Holloway bid. It felt personal. It was more aggressive than it needed to be. Why? The question hung in the air. Jeremy slowly sank back into his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a weary resignation. He looked old. Gideon traced the funding for Holloway's takeover attempt. He said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It's a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, but the source, the real money behind it all, it's him. It's Walter Davies. This isn't about business. It's about finishing the job he started 10 years ago. He wants to destroy me and everything I've built on the ashes of his betrayal. The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was the second act of a tragedy. Davies wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was an active, malevolent force. So what's the plan? Natalia asked her, tone shifting from therapeutic to strategic. How do we fight him? Jeremy laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. There is no we, Miss Oliver. There is me, and I will crush him. I will find a way to bankrupt Holloway, expose Davies, and salt the earth where their partnership stood. You'll do it with anger, Natalia challenged. And he's expecting that. He's counting on it. He knows your playbook because he helped write the first chapter. You'll go on the attack, you'll be aggressive, and he'll have a trap waiting for you. You need a new strategy. And you have one, I presume. He scoffed. He thinks he knows you. Natalia said, her mind racing, connecting the dots. The ruthless tycoon, the shark. He doesn't know the man who tried to build Nightingale. The man who was willing to bet everything on hope. That's the man who can beat him. Not with rage, but with precision. An idea audacious and terrifying began to form in her mind. Walter Davies betrayed you over medical technology. He's a scientist at heart. His weakness isn't finance. It's his ego, his legacy. She pointed to the old Nightingale files. We resurrect it. Jeremy looked at her as if she were insane. That project is dead. The research is gone. The research he stole is gone, Natalia corrected. But the data, the initial framework, the mission, it's all here. We relaunch it. Not as a secret venture, but as a public non-profit foundation. The Leo Whitaker Foundation for Pediatric Research. We announce it at the next shareholders' meeting before the final vote on the takeover. We frame it not as a business move, but as your life's real work. We change the narrative. You're no longer the corporate raider defending his territory. You're the philanthropist trying to save his legacy of hope from the very men who want to destroy it. The audacity of it silenced him. It was a move so far out of left field, so completely contrary to his public persona, that it was brilliant. It would completely blindside Davies and Holloway. It turned their greatest weapon, Jeremy's past trauma, into his greatest strength. A new light flickered in Jeremy's eyes. Not the cold fire of rage, but the spark of a strategist seeing a brilliant, unexpected move on the chessboard. For the first time, he looked at Natalia not as an employee or a curiosity, but as an ally, an equal. "He'll call it a publicity stunt," Jeremy mused, testing the idea. "A desperate ploy. And you'll have the original project files to prove it's been your private passion for over a decade," Natalia countered. "You'll have the memory of your brother. No one can call that a stunt. You'll tell the world the real story. You won't be fighting for Whittaker Capital. You'll be fighting for Leo." The silence stretched thick with possibility. Jeremy walked to the great glass window, looking down at the city. But this time he didn't look like he wanted to conquer it. He looked like he wanted to build something. "Get Gideon in here," Jeremy said, his voice firm, a new resolve in his tone. "And get our PR team on standby. Find me the best medical research teams in the country." He turned to face her, and the ghost that had haunted his eyes for a decade was finally blessedly gone. In its place was a clear, focused light. "Let's give them a fight they never saw coming." Natalia felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. They had formed an unholy alliance, the broken billionaire and the waitress who'd had enough. Together, they were going to war. And for the first time, Jeremy Whittaker wasn't fighting out of anger. He was fighting out of love, and that Natalia knew made him invincible. The days leading up to the final shareholder meeting were the most intense of Natalia's life. She and Jeremy, with Gideon as their steadfast field marshal, worked around the clock. They operated like a single unit, a 3-person army against a corporate hydra. Natalia coordinated with PR firms and medical experts, drafting the announcement for the Leo Whittaker Foundation. Jeremy and Gideon worked the financial angles, shoring up support with loyal board members and preparing a counter-narrative that would detonate with the force of a bomb. Natalia saw a completely different side of Jeremy. The rage was gone, channeled into a laser-like focus. When he spoke of the foundation of the potential to help children like Leo, his voice held a warmth and passion she never thought possible. In return, he started to see her not just as a strategist, but as a person. He asked about Nico, listened intently to her updates on his treatment, and had Gideon quietly arrange for a consultation with one of the top specialists in the field, a doctor affiliated with the very research they were now championing. It was a gesture of profound gratitude offered without fanfare. The day of the meeting arrived. The atmosphere in the Whittaker Capital boardroom was electric with tension. Brendan Holloway and his team sat on one side of the colossal table, smug and confident. They believed they had Jeremy cornered, that his only move was a desperate, angry defense of his stock price. The meeting began as expected. Holloway presented his final, sweetened offer. He spoke of progress and profits, painting Jeremy as a relic of a bygone era clinging to power. Then it was Jeremy's turn. He walked to the podium not with a binder of financial reports, but with a single simple remote in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, his voice calm and resonant, "Mr. Holloway has made a compelling case for the future of this company's balance sheet. Today I want to talk about its soul." He clicked the remote. The massive screen behind him, which was expected to show stock charts, instead displayed the smiling face of the red-haired boy from the file. Leo Whittaker. A murmur went through the room. Holloway and his team exchanged confused glances. "This is my brother, Leo," Jeremy said, his voice thick with emotion, but steady. "Many years ago, I started this company, not just to make money, but to fund a project to save him." For the next 10 minutes, Jeremy told them everything. He told them about Project Nightingale, about his partnership with Walter Davies, about the revolutionary research. He didn't spare the details of the betrayal, but he spoke of it with a sad finality. not rage. He laid his entire broken past bare for the world to see. Then he clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a sleek, hopeful logo, the Leo Whitaker Foundation. Mr. Holloway's takeover bid, which we have now confirmed is being secretly financed by Walter Davies, is not an attempt to build a future. It is an attempt to bury a past, Jeremy declared, his voice rising with power. They want to silence the story of what they did. But we will not be silenced. He announced the immediate launch of the foundation, seeded with a personal donation of $1 billion of his own money. He outlined its mission to fund the very research Davies had tried to steal and kill. It was a masterstroke. The narrative had been shattered. This was no longer a corporate battle. It was a moral crusade. The shareholders who had been weighing profit margins were now looking at a choice between a man trying to honor his dead brother and the ghouls who sought to profit from his tragedy. Holloway was pale, his bravado gone. He kept looking to his legal team, who could only shake their heads. How could they fight this? But Natalia and Jeremy had one final move. "And now," Jeremy said, looking directly at Holloway, "a final piece of due diligence." He nodded to Gideon. Gideon dimmed the lights and played a recording on the main screen. It was an audio file. A voice spoke tinny and distant, but clear. "He's an emotional fool, always has been. He'll get angry, make a rash move, over-leverage himself trying to fight us on the financials. He's predictable. Once we have the company, we bury that Nightingale nonsense for good." The voice was unmistakably Walter Davies. Natalia watched Holloway's face collapse. The recording was the fruit of Gideon's deep dive, a wiretap from a paranoid European investor Davies had tried to recruit, who had then flipped and provided the recording to Whitaker Capital in exchange for leniency in another matter. It was irrefutable proof of their malicious intent. It was checkmate. The vote was a mere formality. Holloway's offer was rejected unanimously and with prejudice. The board then voted to open a formal investigation into market manipulation, effectively ending Brendan Holloway's career and sending Walter Davies scurrying deeper into the shadows, a disgraced ghost. When the room cleared, only 3 people remained: Jeremy, Gideon, and Natalia. The silence was not tense, but peaceful. Jeremy walked over to Natalia, who was standing by the window looking out at the city. "You said you worked to pay for things I couldn't imagine," he said quietly. "You were wrong. Hope is something I'd forgotten how to pay for. You reminded me." He held out his hand. "Thank you, Natalia." She shook it, her grip firm. "You did the work, Mr. Whitaker. I just gave you a new map." "Jeremy." He corrected her, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. "My friends call me Jeremy." She smiled back. "Natalia." There was no talk of a future beyond this moment. No dramatic declarations. Just a shared victory and a quiet, profound understanding. Natalia had walked into the lion's den and had not only survived, but had helped the lion find his way home. She had her brother's future secured, and she had discovered a strength within herself she never knew she possessed. Jeremy had confronted the ghosts of his past and transformed his rage into purpose. They had saved each other. Standing there high above the city that had almost broken them both, they were no longer a billionaire and a waitress. They were 2 survivors ready to build something new from the wreckage of the past. And that's the incredible story of how one woman's refusal to be broken changed the destiny of a powerful man. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how much you have, but about the integrity you refuse to lose. It shows that beneath the surface of anger, there is often deep pain, and sometimes It takes an unexpected act of courage from an unlikely person to begin the healing. What do you think? Was Natalia right to take the job? Or did she compromise her values by working for the man who humiliated her? Could Jeremy truly change, or was this just a clever business move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.